63, climb maintain 13,000.
13,000, JetBlue 63.
63, contact the New York Center, 128.3.
28-3, JetBlue 63, good day.
Hello, Captain.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sky Lounge. I had to pick some more neutral style music to make sure that we were okay with the post-production of our show. So I had to go with a little bit of easy listening. I hope you enjoy it. But as you can see on the screen today, we're going to be going over our last two episodes. We've had a long break with our holidays and not having our regularly scheduled Sky Academy. So I thought I'd go ahead and start things off instead of by jumping back into some hard and heavy content to go over what we learned, jog your memory from December, and then we can press on with more awesome stuff tomorrow. That'll be 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, and I believe 12 a.m. GMT or UK time. So please be sure to tune in if you can, or even put it on in the background if you're at work. But hello to our all of our patrons and our especially our Gold Club members. Thank you for your contributions. Also, thank you to A2A Productions for allowing us to use their most outstanding Cessna 172 model, fully operating and fully able to be used for training, and pretty much as close to real as you can get. But in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and get started. Won't be too long, but we will go over each question in depth to make sure that you guys understand everything that you need to know about the aerodynamics of flight, and then also your pre-flight. Now, this is not going to be exhaustive, and I'm not going to go into incredible detail due to the fact that we want to make it entertaining and also digestible for the general public. Our goal here is to get you interested in aviation and maybe have you learn a couple of things that you didn't know before. So why don't we go ahead and get started? And what is not one of the four forces of flight? So we have lift, pressure, thrust, and drag. Now, if you remember from our first lesson, lift is must be performed by a wing, and that is what brings the aircraft into the air. Drag is the wind resistance and the resistance of the aircraft, and thrust is the ability to move the aircraft forward through the air. So, hopefully in the future we will be able to have some incentives for getting this right. I know that there are some bots out there that have the ability to do quizzes like this, but maybe in the future we'll have some Sky Miles available for the winner. But for tonight, you are correct. It is pressure. Thrust and drag are opposites. Lift and weight are opposites. You have the four forces working on an aircraft to keep it in flight. But pressure is a part of lift, and it's a part of each of these aspects, but it is not one of the four forces interacting in flight. Number 2. Which aerodynamic force is known as the resistance of air? The resistance of air. Now, if you listen to my last question, and I actually gave some hints away, but you have thrust, which propels the aircraft through the air, weight or gravity, which is acting against lift and wanting to move down towards the Earth. You have lift that's creating a force opposite on the opposite direction of gravity, and drag. Drag is in fact the resistance of air. Because as you're pulling your aircraft through the air, the resistance of the air pushing on the aircraft is creating the drag, which wants to stop the aircraft from being in motion. And please, normally I wouldn't ask this, but if you'd like me to cover any of these points or topics and more, please go ahead and place them in chat, and I'll try and be as thorough as I can. Number 3. In straight and level flight, unaccelerated flight, the sum of opposing forces acting on the aircraft is always 0, positive, negative, or OMG Edson. I think we can rule out one of them, despite that he is an excellent character. But we have 0, positive, and negative. So you're in straight and level, unaccelerated flight. The sum of the opposing forces, remember those opposing forces are thrust and drag, lift and weight, or lift and gravity. So you're straight and level, you're not descending, you're not ascending, you're not accelerating, and you're not decelerating. So in fact, your opposing forces are 0. So what happens here is you're actually in a state of balance. And this is very important for weight and balance, which we've discussed in the past, where it may be if the weight and the balance of the weight on the aircraft is so out of balance that you would not even be able to maintain a straight and level flight, because the unbalanced aircraft would not be able to act on these forces appropriately. Moving on. If you load an aircraft tail heavy, the center of gravity will be aft. That's the opposite of forward. Aft is in the back, and the nose will more easily pitch what than if it were forward in a forward loading configuration. So if we pick this apart, if the aircraft is tail heavy and aft of the center of gravity, behind the center of gravity, what will the nose do? So if it were neutral or neutrally buoyant, it would be easy to control. It would be in a balanced configuration. If it were downward, that would mean that the nose would pitch downward, as if the weight were in a certain position, or it would go upward if the weight were in a certain position. And if you haven't guessed yet, if you think about for instance, something on a pin, for instance, we use in flight instruction, we use a styrofoam cup and a pin. If you put that pin directly in the bottom of the cup, it will balance. But if you moved the pin aft or forward, well, as the weight is distributed towards the back of the cup, you would find that the nose would go upward because the tail would be too heavy, which has been a very serious condition and can lead to very bad things. Number 5. We haven't covered this, but I wanted to expand your knowledge and also test your knowledge a little bit. And I think that this is an excellent question to go further than just the 4 forces of flight. So typically a wing is designed to stall from where to where resulting in more effective aileron control during a stall. So, in aerodynamics, a stall does not occur at the same spot on the wing at the same time. Now, if you think about it, there are certain areas of the wing, for instance, ones with more, as you can see on the screen, the wing shape is different from the edge to the front, or from the edge to the center, and from the front to the back. And this all changes the way the air flows over the wing, and also how a stall occurs. Now, a stall is a departure of the air from the normal airflow over the wing. That can either be caused by not enough air flowing over the wing because you're too slow, or the angle of the wing is too high to support lift, and therefore weight takes over. So our options are, we have from bottom to top, so from the bottom of the wing to the top of the wing, from the leading edge of the wing to the trailing edge of the wing, so from front to back, or from the wing root to the wing tip. Now, they're all valid answers, and we could go into a depth of conversation on any of these options, but the answer is actually wing root to wing tip. So wing root is where the wing meets the fuselage, so the body of the airplane, and the wing tip, we'll go back one, is where the wind is. So what happens is, here near the root, we can't see the entire wing. The air starts to break up. The camber of the wing, the shape of the wing is very thick here, so it takes more air, and therefore you start to have a condition where the air starts swirling over the wing. But on the tip of the wing, the air is still providing lift for the wing. But as you increase the bank or increase the pitch and you enter a stalled condition, the air will tend to stall from the wing root all the way out to the wing tip. So you definitely don't stall the wing all at once. Now, this is important in the shape of a wing and the construction of a wing, because certain aircraft are made to stall in different conditions. The wings are made to stall in different conditions. Your aerobatic aircraft are actually made much differently. You have much more of a square wing, and they will tend to stall equally throughout the wing. That gives them a lot more maneuverability, but can also be a lot more dangerous, which is why you don't have student pilots normally flying the extra 300S or a lot of the more stubby wing like the GB. You put them in a really large winged aircraft such as the Cessna 172. You wouldn't think of it as a large wing, but it's designed to be very forgiving in terms of stalling. Number 6. The weight and balance sheet for your aircraft is locked in the FBO. That's the fixed-based operator, more commonly referred to as the primary business on the field. Fixed-based operator was a term used in the beginning of the 20th century to describe an office or a place that would do flight instruction, riding in airplanes and stuff like that, at a fixed location. Because normally what you would find is aircraft would just go out to a farmer's field and someone would set up a table and they would offer rides and instruction and things like that. So once proper airports started coming along, the term fixed-based operator was originally used to describe these offices or flight schools, and the name stuck. But we'll call it a flight school. So the weight and balance sheet for your aircraft is locked inside the building of the flight school. Can you legally fly that airplane? Now remember that we talked about AERO. That's the Airworthiness Certificate, the Aircraft Manual. ARROW, Aircraft, or the Airworthiness Certificate, the Radio Operator's Permit, the... and I've blanked. The registration, the Operator's Handbook, and the weight and balance. So because those 5 things need to be present in the aircraft, if the weight and balance sheet is not in the aircraft, it is not legal to fly. Now these are based on FAA standards. I believe they're the same for the Joint Aviation Regulations, and there's not a lot of differences throughout the world. Because if you get, for a number of reasons, if you get stuck at a different airport and you don't have the information you need, you're going to need this sheet to make sure that your aircraft is safe to fly. Because if you put too much cargo or luggage in the back, you can actually get into, once again, a very dangerous situation where if there's too much weight in the back, the nose will tend to tip up. And on takeoff, if it's you can literally stall the aircraft out and be unable to control it because you will be too tail heavy. Now, not to be morbid here, and I do see that I've misspelled legally, but anyways, it is very important that this piece of paper, as well as the other documents, be in the airplane. Number 8. Now we're getting into our pre-flight questions. This is our second pre-flight question. When sampling fuel, you should check for what? Now remember that we have a fuel checker. There's a number of names for it. We'll go with fuel checker that has a stick, and they have these things throughout along the wing underneath the fuel tank called sumps. And you take a small sample of fuel from each of the sumps on the aircraft, and you check to see if there's a number of things wrong with it. Now, it was interesting that actually I disagreed with the... this was a question from a professional source that said one thing, but I'm going to go through each of these issues, each of these different aspects of fuel, and tell you why they are all important. So the color is important because you need to make sure you're flying with the right type of gas in your aircraft. Now, 80 octane is red, 100 octane is green, 100 low lead octane is blue, and jet fuel is white. So if you were to come up to your Cessna 172 and do a fuel check and you found white fuel in your aircraft, you would know that that is a definite issue and a safety of flight issue. A lot of times you have your 100 low lead, which is blue, right next to a jet fuel tank, which is white. Now, the openings on the Cessna 172 are not like your car. They're just holes where you put the fuel in. And there's actually been very serious incidents where people have accidentally put the wrong type of fuel in the aircraft. The smell of the fuel is important. It's actually a good idea to do a quick smell check of the fuel. There's such a thing as having microbial contaminants, where bacteria sets up in the fuel tank, and you'll find that it's not only changes, like for instance, we'll go with 100 low lead because that's the most commonly used fuel from my knowledge, but there will be a different odor to the fuel if there are bacteria in there, and there will also be a different color. The feel, just like oil, fuel has a viscosity, and the feel of aviation fuel, of like 100 low lead or octane gas versus the feel of jet engine fuel is different. Oh, and I forgot on smell. You know this what normal gas smells, what octane gas smells like. Smells of things like benzene, and it has a definitely noticeable smell. But if you smell jet fuel, it actually smells a little bit and looks a little bit like straw. It has a different smell to it. And that is another way of deciding, especially if you sump your Cessna 172 and you get the wrong color. I definitely wouldn't take a significant smell, but there's never any harm in doing a thorough check of the fuel. Contamination is important. That's what you'll most commonly find in a fuel tank of a Cessna 172. What happens unavoidably is that these fuel tanks are placed in the ground underneath the concrete or the tarmac. And as hard as you can try, there still is rain and other water that will get into the tanks, just because nothing of these systems are not foolproof. So you're ready to go flying, you've filled up your gas tank, you're getting excited to get in the aircraft, and you check the fuel by using the sumps and your fuel checker, and lo and behold, there are bubbles of water at the bottom of your fuel checker. Now, 100 low lead fuel is lighter than water, so the bubbles of water at the bottom will tell you that there is actually water that has been transferred from either the tank in the ground, or from water getting into the fuel tank from the aircraft itself. Good courses of action to do at this point are continue checking. If it's an isolated incident and there's only a couple drops of water, you should be okay. If you are a student pilot, I would highly encourage you to tell someone, make sure that your aircraft is safe to fly. Most likely a competent person will test the fuel, see if there is any other indications that it's wrong. But there will also be, if there are other types of contamination, there could be particles of metal. That's an indication of corrosion, and or bacteria, and or any number of things, just dirt getting into the fuel tanks. Also, another reason to talk to the AMP on field, the maintenance person, the flight school director, anybody that can help you out. Any of these, if you do find, are reasons not to fly the aircraft. Now, temperature is less of an issue, but I would say that it is also an issue, because if you are flying from an area of high temperature to an area of low temperature, fuel condenses, and there will actually be less fuel in your aircraft by the time you get to the cold weather than you are in the hot weather, because it expands due to heat. The molecules separate and vibrate more actively. So it's good to note how hot that fuel is, because it can change the range that you have on your aircraft. Now, I went ahead and I believe that you may have thought all of the above, but actually the best options are A through D. Temperature is not much of a factor, because if it's hot outside, it's going to be hot in the aircraft, but it's still something to know. But color, smell, feel, and contamination are all things that you should check. The professional source that I referred to for this only mentioned color and contamination. But I really felt that smell and feel are two important factors, because just to mention another part of bad fuel, if you feel it, the viscosity may be actually breaking down. So jet fuel has a different viscosity than your Cessna 172-100 low lead. But it also, the feeling of the fuel will be different if the gas has been sitting for a long time. Fuel does have a lifespan, and it will begin to separate. The chemical components will begin to separate over a long period of time. It's not something that you can detect as easily as color or contamination, but it is something that could lead you to decide, especially if you already know that there has been sitting fuel for a long time. In the car world, or if you're fueling up your lawnmower, sometimes you'll have an additive that lengthens the life of the fuel. Something that you're not allowed to use in an aircraft, but it's something to consider. Number 9. During cold winter months, how much pressure does a tire typically lose? Now, this is a tire without leaks in it for every 10 degrees of Fahrenheit. Now, what happens is just like your car, if you start with if you fill up your tire in the summer and you leave it at the same temperature, it has no leaks, it will stay at that PSI, pounds per square inch. But as the weather gets significantly colder during changes in the season, a lot of times in your newer cars, the pressure light will come on. So what happens is that once again the air loses pressure because the molecules of air are colder and not moving as rapidly and as far as they would be if it were hot. So a lot of times, and that's the reason that air pressure is checked very often in an aircraft, because you need to make sure that the recommended values are in the tire. Now, an interesting side note. Can you tell me which source is correct for the amount of air in a tire? Is it what's listed on the tire, or what's listed in the owner's and maintenance handbook? And the answer is, in fact, the maintenance handbook. The pressure on the tire is not the source that you use to keep a tire pressure in the right zone. And that's due to a number of things: the design of the aircraft when it was tested, and certain you can have two different aircraft with the same tire, but they would need two different pressures to maintain the aircraft properly. So getting back to our question, we can either have 1 psi per 10 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 psi per 10 degrees Fahrenheit, or 10 psi for every 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you imagine your car tire, you fill it up on a nice summer day, and then it becomes fall and it gets colder, and then you notice that it's just not quite as doesn't have quite the pressure that it used to. If you think about it, 1 psi per every 10 degrees Fahrenheit is how much pressure a tire will typically use. It's not a great amount, but let's say you fill in the summer and you don't get your aircraft out until late fall. That could be as much as 40 degrees or 4 psi, and on some aircraft maintenance manuals and pilot's operating handbook, you will know that there is a very strict range for tire pressure. So your zone could be as low as 3 or 4 psi. And in fact, if you lost 40 degrees, you would actually go from being in the zone to being out of the zone. Before... Oh! We did it. Okay. Hello, Mr. Nuke. Before a flight lesson with a student pilot, who is responsible for ensuring that the aircraft is safe to fly? So, is the flight school the deciding factor if an aircraft is safe? Remember, this is a student pilot, so he doesn't have all the knowledge to be able to make an informed decision for the most part. Is it the student pilot, the person who is flying the aircraft that day? Or is it the instructor, the person that is overseeing the aircraft? Now, there's a number of different answers that you could come up with. I would say that most people would tend to decide that the student pilot is the deciding factor, because they're the one learning, they're the one that will be flying the plane that day, and should feel comfortable enough to say, no, I don't feel comfortable flying this aircraft. But it is actually the instructor. Now, the instructor is considered the pilot in command. He or she is the one that decides if that aircraft is safe to fly or not, because the student pilot does not have the license that qualifies them to make that determination. But I did put an asterisk, a caveat to that, and which is that when a student is on a solo flight, they can act as pilot in command. They can, and when they are pilot in command, they can make a determination if the aircraft is safe to fly or not. But normally it will be your instructor. So that concludes our quiz for the evening. Now, tomorrow's lesson, starting at 12 o'clock GMT, 7 o'clock Eastern, and 4 o'clock Pacific, will be over aviation weather. We're going to go over some interesting and general weather knowledge to understand what you'll be doing and how you'll be flying and when to go and when not to go flying in weather. And hopefully we'll give you some more tips and feed that knowledge for flying. This is something that can be very easily transferred knowledge to the flight sim world as well. With a number of our very complex and very cool weather programs out there now, we can create all sorts of weather, which I will be doing, to simulate weather conditions for different weather systems. So, I hope you've enjoyed our quiz for today. And this is something, once again, to get back into the swing of things, to remind you of some of the things we went over. And tomorrow we will go into our next lesson. So until then, safe flying, good luck, and I will see you tomorrow.
63, climb maintain 13 down.
13,000, 63.
463, contact the New York Center 128.3.
28, ready, just 63, good day.